Welcome to the fourth edition of our podcast series, Talking Data, which offers timely insights into macro data and its impact on the economy and markets. I'm Kristen Radish of Arbor Research and Trading. Our podcast features Jim Bianco of Bianco Research. In today's installment, we'll be discussing the election and the markets. Jim, pundits on financial TV have largely been discounting a blue wave this November, giving Biden the presidency and the Democrats control of the Senate. That may end up being the case, but recent data suggests the election will be much tighter than they expect. The markets may be caught off guard with either a Trump victory or if Republicans hold on to the Senate. Let's start with discussing the betting markets versus the polls for the U.S. presidential election. What is the latest? Are they getting closer?
Yeah, thanks. No, what's interesting is the modern betting market started in 1988 with the Iowa political stock market. And typically the betting markets are the aggregation of everything that is known into one probability, and they largely mirror the polls. Sometimes they lead the polls by days or a week or two because markets can react faster to events than running a poll. But this time around, the polls, and if you look at the poll analyzers like Charlie Cook of the Cook Report or Nate Silver 538, they're giving Trump around a 25 or 30% chance of winning the election. But the betting markets are around mid 40s to upper 40s that Trump would win the election. I'll put all of my references to the incumbent. So that's a big spread between the two, and that's unusual. Now, what to make of that? The betting markets are always trying to answer the question, who's going to win? And who's going to win on November 3rd? So they're always looking ahead to that. The polls always ask the question, who would you vote for today? So the betting markets could be anticipating some tightening of the race. They could be anticipating an event, either known or unknown, that could sway it in favor of Trump. Now, let me be clear on something. Trump is mid 40s. He's not leading, but that's close enough to call a coin toss. We're in the polls, Biden is got a 75% chance or Trump's got a 25% chance. That's solidly in Biden's favor as well too. This is not I'm not making an argument Trump's going to win. I'm making an argument that this is a lot closer. And last thought for you on this. What makes it a lot closer? I think, interestingly, the least useful data point that we can get is the one that everybody cites. The national polls say that Biden's up by 7 points or 8 points. Why is that not useful? Because we don't vote on a national election. We vote in 50 state elections, and it's about winning 270 electoral college votes. So really, every election, there's 40 states, including our illustrious state of Illinois, which are already decided who they're going to vote for. It always comes down to about 10 swing states. In this election, it's going to be Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And really 4. And how those 4 states swing one way or the other will determine who gets 270 electoral college votes. So the betting markets could be focused on Pennsylvania and Arizona and Florida, which has been somewhat trending towards Trump. Biden can still win by 7 points. But if Trump trends a little bit more in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, he'll get more than 270 electoral college votes, and he'll become reelected as president.
Let's talk about the significance of another big upcoming event, which is the presidential debates. We've got the first one scheduled for September 29th, but I guess a big question would be, will there be debates? Will that first one happen?
Yeah, I've jokingly said that this is the most important debate in American history. And let me qualify or explain that. I think the debate is going to come down to basically one issue only, and that is Joe Biden's competence. If he stands there for 2 hours during the debate and he's lucid and he seems to be with it and all that, I think Biden wins no matter how much people nitpick what he might or might not have said. If he loses his train of thought, makes statements that no one understands, and goes off on tangents, and all of those things that the Republicans have been pushing against, and he underscores that, I think he's in trouble. And it doesn't matter what Trump says or doesn't say. So I think that when you ask the question, will the debate happen? It's really about, Biden and his fitness for office, because that's the one thing I think that's holding any of his voters back is what is his fitness for office. Now, obviously, those I'm talking about here, the undecided voters. It's true that just like 40 states have decided who they're going to vote for, 90% of the American public already knows who they're going to vote for, maybe even 95. So this election is really about trying to sway a small handful of truly undecided voters. And when you go to the truly undecided voters that cannot decide, I think one of the biggest concerns they have is a 78-year-old Joe Biden and whether or not he is up for the task of being president of the United States.
If we talk about, and we change direction a little bit here, what if we end up with a contested outcome of the election? What if it takes weeks or even months to declare a winner? How will the market react during that time frame?
So for a historical standpoint, the 2000 election was contested. It took 36 days, and the S&P sold off 13%. Now, the difference between that one and a potential contested election this time around is nobody saw 2000 as coming down to a contested election. If you recall, the reason it was contested was it came down to who won Florida, and it was 500 votes that determined who won Florida, which is why we've got those images, indelible images of people looking at hanging chads and stuff, because they were just trying to figure out 500 votes. This time around, there is a solid understanding that this will be an open election that might go on for days and days. As a matter of fact, some Democrat sites have really referred to this as a red mirage. And what they mean by that is election night, 1 in the morning, Trump will declare victory. And he will have more than 270 electoral college votes. And then we have to start counting all the mail-in ballots. And the perception is that that will skew Republican. And one by one, over the next couple of days, states will fall away from Trump. And eventually, by Thanksgiving or something like that, it might swing towards Biden. That's a well understood idea that might come around. And it's got some precedent. Martha McSally, who's a Republican, who was running for the Republican seat in Arizona, on election night was up by 15,000 votes. And Arizona has mail-in ballots. And 3 weeks later, she was down by 5,000 votes and lost the election. Martha McSally eventually was put in place when John McCain passed away. So she wound up being a senator anyway, but not through winning that election. And she has to run for re-election again this fall. So that's where I think that the contested election comes. One, we know that it might happen. Two, we almost expect it. And three, their perception is that it will, whatever we wind up with election night, will start eroding away when we start measuring the mail-in ballots. Now, here's a fun one for you. What if it goes past January 20th? The lawsuits fly, the lawyers are involved. We've got 20 states where we're doing what we did in Florida with contesting every single vote and hanging chad. And now it's noon on January 20th, and we still don't know who won the presidency. Who becomes the president? Well, a bunch of constitutional scholars have looked into it and said, this is kind of conjecture because it was never really contemplated. But as far as they can tell, we would have a temporary president as the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and we would have a temporary vice president as the president pro tem, which would be Mitch McConnell. And they would then remain as the president and vice president until such time that the election is certified, and then that person would be sworn in and take over. So that's like the worst case scenario, that we don't even know who's going to be the president on January 20th.
So much to come. I mean, so much can happen in the next few months. It's going to get very interesting. Let's consider this scenario. It's 90 days post-election. What do equities do in the case of a Biden victory? in comparison to if we're looking at a Trump victory?
See, now we're getting into policy, and that's always fraught with, I'm going to step on somebody's religion here a little bit by getting into policy. That's why I prefer the horse race. But let's let's get into it. First of all, I would argue that the markets are more in line with the betting markets, and that they think that this is a somewhat close race. So there is more discounting to come in this election, one way or the other. And they're not so much like the polls where they've just discounted a Biden victory. One of the things that happened in 2016, that when Trump won, the consensus opinion was this is going to be a collapse of the stock market because he's very bad for the economy and the stock market. And the opposite turned out to be the case, which is almost always the case when it comes to the consensus opinion. And one of the reasons I think that Trump, at least initially in 2017 and 18, was so positive for the market is he was a big regulation cutter. He got rid of red tape and he unleashed business because of that. And that was a big positive for the stock market or risk markets. If Biden wins, Biden has already said repeatedly and over, he'll raise taxes and he'll impose more regulation on business. So I think all things being equal, that's going to be a big drag on the stock market, which I don't think is completely priced in. And remember, if he's going to do regulation, he also needs the Senate. Let me make a quick word about the Senate here, kind of pivot to that as well too. Right now, the Senate is 47 Democrats, 45 Democrats, and 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats, and 53 Republicans. So the Republicans could lose 2 seats and maintain their majority if they win the presidency. That would be 51-49, or 3 seats. They could lose 3 seats if they hold the presidency. That would turn it to 50-50, and then Mike Pence would break the tie, and it would still be a Republican majority of Senate. Or only 2 seats if Biden wins. They'd have to be 51-49. Otherwise, a 50-50 Senate winds up becoming a Democrat Senate. The betting markets and the polls have this Senate election somewhere right on 50-50. Matter of fact, it was exactly 50-50 in the betting markets last week, who's going to control the Senate. And the polls have got it that the Democrats are going to pick up 2 seats. That's 51-49 Republican. And there's a couple of other seats that are at risk, serious risk as well too. So the Senate could really go like the presidency with the contested election, with the mail-in ballots. It could be days and days before we find out who's the majority of the Senate. The House is 30 plus seats majority for the Democrats. It's expected that that will remain the case there. So there will be no change in the majority in the House. So that won't be an issue at all.
Any final thoughts as we wrap up our discussion on the election today?
I'm fond of saying a phrase that I've used a lot, that this election will turn on events that have not happened yet. And one of those events was what happened in Kenosha with the protests that turned violent and as well too. I suspect that the debates and potentially other events, October surprises, are still to come, and that this election will still turn on who's going to win the election. When we look at it all said and done and say who won, we're going to say that there was X or Y or Z event that turned the election. They haven't happened yet. Just like in 2018, if you asked, what was the event that really helped swing the Democrats to win the House back from the Republicans? It was the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. Well, they didn't happen until October. And so, that was the event that no one foresaw that kind of swung the election that way as well, too. So I would also argue, when I hear Charlie Cook of the Cook Report say the election's over, all the scenarios lead to a Biden victory. Yeah, Charlie, the event that's going to turn the election hasn't happened. Now, that doesn't mean that Biden could still win. Biden could still win by a landslide. But I would argue that the event that will cause a Biden landslide is still to come. Trump is always a wild card there. He could do something very bad or he could do something very good. So keep in mind that when you're trying to figure out who won the election, the event might not have happened that might swing the election. It might still be to come.
So definitely more to come. Thank you for your thoughts today, Jim. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. As a reminder, Arbor Research and Trading is an institutional research and brokerage firm that produces innovative research across a broad range of global fixed income, equity, currency, and commodity markets. Bianco Research and Arbor Data Science are our two most prominent research offerings. Jim will be hosting a conference call this Thursday, September 17th, entitled How Big a Correction? Please join us for that. For registration information and further information, Arbor Research, Bianco Research, and Arbor Data Science, please contact Gus Handler at gus.handler@arborresearch.com.